Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshack if you want to call me by my in-game name. In this video, we're going to be talking about kind of the top 5 legendaries that stand out. For me, at least, in the newest set, Journey to Un'Goro. I wanted to wait a little bit to make this video to make sure that I'm really picking out, you know, like the top 5 legendaries that not only I've seen in ladder, but I've used myself in practical play, whether or not I'm deck testing or doing a deck guide. These are kind of the legendaries that just shine above the rest of them in the set. Not to say that there aren't other good legendaries, but these 5 definitely have set themselves, like I've mentioned, apart and fit in to their respective decks very well, but they also have the ability to fit into other decks that may not exactly be what they're played in the most, which gives them kind of the flexibility spot. So if you're looking to craft any of the new legendaries, these 5 are definitely a good way, or a good direction to be looking when crafting them. So let's pull up the sidebar here. The first one's going to be Sunkeeper Tarim. I'm sure this isn't a surprise to anybody. This card is absolutely crazy in most Paladin decks, whether you're playing the aggressive Murloc Paladin deck, which is very powerful right now, definitely, and even though this guy seems to be a little bit more mid-range to control, he costs 6 mana, you know, he doesn't burst your opponent down unless you have a field full of cheap Murlocs, then you're setting him to 3/3. This guy, you know, when he first got revealed, he looks more of like a mid-range / control card. You know, your opponent plays an 8/8 or 2 8/8s or fills the field up with like giant creatures. You play this guy, they get set to 3. Or you could have a minion of small, or you could have a field full of small minions yourself. You drop Sunkeeper and all of a sudden they're pretty annoying, right? You can if you have 3 minions, all of a sudden they turn into 9 damage. Because each one counts as 3. So definitely took a lot of people by surprise at how much he was going to be played. I knew he was going to be good, but to see him in like almost every Paladin deck, like I mentioned, whether you're running aggro Murlocs or you're running late game control or you're running N'Zoth, he's probably going to be in your deck, which again is why he's kind of in our top 5 spot, definitely. Moving on to the next legendary, we have the Corpse Flower. I fucked that up. So this guy is really interesting, right? So when he was first revealed, for a while now, a lot of the rogue legendaries, with the Collector and Corpse Flower, a lot of people were like, you know what, these are pretty subpar legendaries. Granted, you know, if Miracle Rogue is still around after the rotation, maybe Corpse Flower will be played, but paying 4 mana for a 5/3, 3 HP was the big problem because he dies relatively easily, and then you have to play 4 cards just to bring him back, and then he can't even like attack or do anything, and then what happens if he just dies again? So there was a lot of discussion whether or not this card would be good or bad in Miracle Rogue, and then if Miracle Rogue was even going to be a deck, because if Miracle Rogue wasn't a deck, this guy is useless. He has to specifically go into Miracle Rogue, but luckily, Miracle Rogue is still around, even without Tomb Pillager and also the rotation of Conceal out and now found in only Wild. This guy has actually made its really good home in Miracle Rogue and fits quite nicely. And most of the time, if you can play your cards correctly and are kind of looking ahead a few turns, you're going to be able to bring this guy back, you know, 3 or 4 times depending on when you play him in the game, which is just really, really, really annoying for your opponent because, you know, the second you start getting in 5-10 poke damage, your opponent goes down to, you know, that around 15 life. They need to be start getting worried about your burst damage with Miracle Rogue, whether or not you're going to be cold blooding a Leroy, double Avissing, dropping some Arcane Giants. So this guy not only puts consistent pressure, but he's just really annoying at that, and playing 4 cards in a turn, as much as it sounds like it could be difficult, if there's a deck that can do it, it's Miracle Rogue. You know, with the new Flower Edition, with the fact that you can generate 2 Razor Petal Volleys with 1 card, you know, you got Mimic Pod now, you've got coins, you have preps, Auctioneer is still a thing, so it's just kind of like, it's not as hard as it seems, and that was the original problem before people were testing him in Miracle Rogue, was first, if Miracle Rogue is a thing, then maybe this will be a thing, and then if we can again see how many times we can utilize his kind of rebirth effect, that'll determine how good this card is. And it turned out he was pretty good, and definitely, I don't want to say an absolute staple in a Miracle Rogue, but he's kind of one of those cards that's very, very hard to replace because there's no other card like him that you can put in the deck that will that'll resemble the same sort of ability. Like, there's not even anything close, right? So definitely one of those really nice cards that sticks out to me and is found in a whole lot of rogue decks. So moving to the next one, we have Lyra. At first, this was kind of like a joke card. Everybody did not think she was going to be that great. One of the developers hyped the Priest legendary up a lot. He said the Priest legendary may be broken, and he goes maybe even too broken. So people are really expecting some big bang boost, big dick swinger coming out of this Priest legendary. And then they see Lyra, the 5-mana 3/5 elemental. Whenever you cast a spell, put a random Priest spell in your hand. They're like, well, that effect is cool and all, but she costs 5 mana, right? So if you play her on turn 10, which is already really late in the game, you can cast what, maybe 2, maybe 3 spells if you're lucky, and that's getting random priest spells. As if you've been playing this game at all, priests have some of the worst spells in the game, definitely when you're just generating them at random, because you can get cards like, let's pull up the meme real quick that people were saying. There's a plethora of cards here that are kind of just useless unless you can, in some situations, the cards are useful. So for example, Shadow Word, Horror, Mind Blast, Holy Smite, it all depends on the situation. Sometimes the cards are useful, sometimes they're not, and that revolves around them being very reactive cards. And when you have a deck full of reactive cards and your opponent doesn't do anything that you need to react to, they kind of just sit there and do nothing. But, on the off chance that they happen to play the exact cards that work to your advantage when generating random cards, sure, those games can go your way. But what people didn't keep in mind was that priests are going to already run some pretty cheap spells. Whether you're running Power Word Shield, Potion of Madness, people are attacking 2 of those into their deck, and then double Shadow Word Pain. So there's just already a lot of cheap priest spells that people are going to run anyway. And then they're like, well, we lost Azure Drake, so we still need to fit in a 5-mana slot. Lyra isn't an Azure Drake, but she still has 5 HP, which is kind of annoying, 3 attack, which is okay, and the fact that if she sticks around for a couple turns, most of the time she's going to be able to generate a sizable amount of value. Also, there's Radiant Elementals now that reduce the cost of the reduce the cost of mana cards in your hand, or spell cards in your hand by 1. Reduce the cost of mana cards, Rob. What are you doing? So that's actually pretty important to the combo if you're running the Miracle Lyra Priest deck. But for the most part, the important fact about this card is that she fits into Dragon, she fits into, Silence Priest, she fits into Miracle Priest. She's wiggled her way into just about any priest deck you can build, and it doesn't really offset really too much. It's just one of those cards that if you play it and your opponent doesn't deal with it, it's just reoccurring value almost instantaneously, if not over the course of a couple turns, which is the signs of a very powerful card. When we think of cards that, change games, Ragnaros, Ysera, Thunderbuff, Valiant when he was around, if you just don't deal with those cards, Mana Tide Totem, you just don't deal with them, they just keep generating these value or dealing damage or drawing you cards, and your opponent will eventually not be able to deal with what it's provided you, because they don't have something like that on the board. So it's just one of those cards, really annoying if undealt with, and by itself can definitely win you games. The only problem is the cards, again, are random, so hopefully you can use them to the best of your abilities when she generates them. It also makes for some pretty crazy plays if you end up generating a lot of the cards, like Shadow Word Pain, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast. You can turn yourself into a Shadow Priest. There's just a lot of stuff that you can do. So the next legendary is going to be Elise. Maybe not as popular as the Sunkeeper or the Corpse Flower, or even the Lyra, but it's one of those cards that it's actually picking up in Steam with the amount of people playing it, especially in priest decks. So with cards like Shadow Vision out, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with that card, it allows you to kind of discover a spell in your deck and you can choose it. So essentially you put the Elise Trailblazer on the board, she shuffles a pack into your deck, you play Shadow Visions, and you Shadow Visions the pack. So you can generate basically multiple packs, and there's not a whole lot of decks that can outvalue you opening 3 packs with 5 cards per pack. That's basically 15 extra cards that your opponent now has to deal with, and on top of that, this adds a card to your deck which allows you to last longer in the fatigue battle. So Elise has seen more and more play, even in the N'Zoth Paladin. It's shown promise. People are sometimes putting in there a control warrior. We've seen it in Handlock, and it's just been basically going around being tested. Control Shaman. There's just a lot of decks that, you know, opening up a pack that grants you 5 cards is crazy value, and on top of that, the card pack value has been drastically increased. So most of the time, you're opening up a legendary and a few epics and maybe a common or two. But for the most part, the scale of the rarity of the packs is definitely in your favor in regards to getting, you know, a really powerful card or a couple really powerful cards. So she is definitely, the popularity of Elise has increased since the start, and it's definitely one of those cards that, you know, you can't really go wrong with putting her in your control decks. Granted that, you know, sometimes she doesn't fit perfectly, but she's still not a bad card, and I'm sure over the course of the next couple sets that get released, she's gonna be even more popular. Because this is just a really cool ability, and it definitely, adding on to cards in your deck is always a good thing for fatigue, and then the value she generates is just, you know, you can't beat it. So it's just one of those cards that stick out to me as an up-and-comer, and she's proven that. Next card is going to be the Primal Lord. Unfortunately, this card is only found in Elemental Shaman, but just in comparison to some of the other legendaries that I've looked at in the set, this is like kind of our only one that is, and it's a must-have in an Elemental Shaman, but that's the only deck it fits into. But there's not a lot of other legendaries in the set that stood out to me as a have-to-have, and they're like not that good. So for example, looking at like the Shaman class quest, right? It's just Unite the Murlocs. It's a cool card. Of course, it's a staple in the Murloc Shaman deck, but is the deck actually pretty good? No, not really. While looking at like Elemental Shaman, is the deck good? Yeah, it's pretty good. And is this a staple? Absolutely. So definitely good card if you're thinking about getting yourself into the Elemental Shaman package. But like I said, unfortunately, with it not being a neutral card and it specifically being used for the Elemental class or Elemental archetype, it fits in a very niche deck. So just be careful in crafting this card. Definitely something you need to keep in mind, though, if that is a deck that interests you. But for those of you wanting to play a variety of different decks, you know, stuff like the Sunkeeper, the Lyra, and the Elise may be a little bit more promising because, like I've mentioned, they fit not only into a specific class or a specific deck, they kind of, you know, they're flex cards. They move around and they get along with just about everybody. So that's going to wrap up our top 5 kind of legendaries out of this set that caught my eye. But on a side note, there is a couple cards that I wanted you to, again, take note of, and that's going to be, I didn't want to put the class legendary quests in their own, it's mixed in with the normal legendary actual minions. So 2 of the class quests that you definitely, if you don't, should try to get your hands on, because the decks are extremely powerful, is going to be, of course, the Taunt Warrior, which is, the deck is, you know, definitely tier 1, if not high tier 2, but I'm pretty sure it's tier 1 for sure. It's found in a bunch of different tournaments. You're going to run into it on ladder, and it basically just has a win condition that if your opponent isn't killing you like early on, there's not a whole lot of decks that can handle a 2-mana 8 damage fireball over and over and over again every turn while getting through taunt minions and weapons and armor gain, great single target removal with execute, great AoE removal with brawl. So just a really powerful deck. And then another one that sticks out to me is definitely going to be the Caverns Below, which is the rogue quest. Again, if you've played Hearthstone at all in the past month or so, you've seen these decks and you know how powerful they are. I didn't want to make this top legendary video without giving note to these legendary quests, because they're definitely some of the best, but I didn't really look at them as creatures so much as the first 5 cards I reviewed. So definitely wanted to put these in here, but not include them in the kind of like the minions we went over. These are kind of, I figured they should be separate with being legendary quests and all. So hopefully you've enjoyed. Very good stuff going on here. A lot of really powerful cards. I'm glad there wasn't a ton of filler legendaries. I mean, there are some legendary quests that aren't so good, but the problem is if they made every legendary quest really good, it's very hard to balance those things, guys. So maybe it's hard to say when new cards get released. Some legendary quests may be good and some may, you know, drop to the bottom. We've seen it time and time again with cards rotating out and new cards entering the meta. So don't get discouraged if maybe a card or two you opened up isn't great now, because maybe it will be. So as always, hopefully you've enjoyed, and if you'd like to add on to anything that I've said or mentioned, of course I can't cover everything I think about. I try to make these videos in a if time efficient as possible, but that's where the comment section is for those of you looking for some additional information. So as always, I'm Warshack, of course, and happy whatever the hell day it is.